3 lives, 3 worlds, Lotus steps. Wherever step goes, Lotus blooms. Divine prayer. Lotus Step Chapter 29. Book 2. Zhao, she sent Chengyu back to the Hachin team 3 days later. Lian Song and his entourage, who had been following the camel team, had already left. Zhao Shi saw Chengyu's stunned expression and asked her if she was disappointed. Chengyu shook his head. No, I was just thinking that Lian San is indeed the one who keeps his promise. Zhao, she couldn't tell whether she was telling the truth or a lie. In the wedding procession, General Li Zhili and Qin Yuan, Shilangqin, were the eldest among the military attachés and civil servants respectively. Since they got married, these 2 adults have witnessed many strange things and chaos. They are reshaping their worldview and becoming more mature. So easy to deceive. Chengyu took the initiative to explain, saying that she couldn't sleep that night and walked along the Emerald Pond and unexpectedly fell into a mysterious underground palace. Prince Ji then came to rescue her, and the 2 of them were trapped in the underground palace together. Fortunately, Prince Ji had learned Qimenduanjia. With this skill, the 2 of them found the exit and were rescued smoothly. She talked nonsense so well that General Li and Qin Shilang did not doubt that he was there, and the princess's disappearance was considered exposed. Ziyuan was stupid and believed Chengyu's nonsense. Chengyu's description of the underground palace was so realistic that he was fascinated and wanted to go explore it immediately. Even Yao Huang and Li Xiang couldn't stop him. Fortunately, Zhu Jin arrived in time and tied him up with the demon-binding rope. Zhu Jin is not General Li and Master Qin, nor is he Ziyuan. What happened to Chengyu's sudden disappearance? Zhu Jin has no idea what happened. After cleaning up Ziyuan, he transformed into a long sword in his hand and stood in front of Chengyu. Zhao Shi was about to be killed. Fortunately, Chengyu reacted quickly and blocked the way, forcing Zhu Jin to stop his sword midway. In addition, Yao Huang, who was very good at being a peacemaker, also hurriedly came up to give some advice, and the murder case was stopped. What no one expected was that in the end, the most unlucky person would be Ziyuan. Because Zhu Jin was very angry these days, no one dared to talk to him, and he himself also forgot that his demon-binding ope was still tied to Ziyuan. When he remembered, the unlucky Ziyuan he had been tied up for 5 days, and the whole demon was in bad shape. On the day when the dying Ziyuan was released, the escort team was only 10 miles away from the border between Xi and Wu. The advance messenger rushed back as night fell to report that the 4th Prince Minda had personally led the ceremony officials to greet him and was waiting on the north bank of the Kaisha River, which serves as the border between the 2 countries. Chen Shilang and generally discussed and felt that it was good for Prince Minda to be so polite. However, it was already dark, and although it was only a dozen miles away, it was not dignified for the princess to rush to see her fiancé at night. They should still let Wu Nuosu feel it. Seeing Daxi's demeanor as a country with great etiquette, he decided to set up camp on the spot and let Prince Minda wait all night. Because they were to meet up with Minda's wedding team the next day, in the camp that night, the officials attending the wedding were either arranging the ceremony of the guard of honor or counting the dowry. This small poplar forest looked solemn and busy. But no matter how busy she was, nothing would happen, so she settled into the account early. While flipping through a book of flower and bird paintings under the lamp, he suddenly heard a roar in the distance, like thunder. Chengyu just raised his head from the book and saw Li Xiang rushing in. He pulled her and ran out. Startled, "Princess, come and see." The 2 came outside the tent and there was another bang. Chengyu raised her eyes, and the fireworks in the sky were like a flower event, vying to squeeze into her eyes. She was stunned for a moment. The sky in the Gobi is heavy and the sky is low in the wilderness, giving people the feeling that they can reach for the stars with their hands. At this time, these fireworks blooming in the thick black sky also seem to be so close that they can reach out and touch them. Although they are not as grand as she is here. The 2 scenes seen in Pingan City have their own kind of splendor and vividness. Li Xiang looked up at the sky and said intoxicatedly, "Princess, isn't it beautiful?" Chenyu didn't answer. Li Xiang added, "These fireworks seem to have been set off from the colorful stone river." I guess they're a meeting gift from Prince Minda to the princess. What does the princess think? Chengyu still didn't answer. Suddenly a loud whistle sounded in midair. Bang, 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 bang. 16 fireworks exploded one after another. This time, the scattered light points did not form a flower cup, but condensed into 16 Chinese characters and a line of Wunua. The text is laid out in mid-air. It's hard to send fishes and geese to love you, but I will pay you the words of fire trees and silver flowers. Li Xiang stared at the 2 lines of Chinese and read out loud. After finishing reading, he was stunned and half covered his lips to Qingyu. This is indeed Prince Minda. A gift for the princess. He glanced at the faint words in the sky and whispered. These 16 words mean that he missed the princess a lot, and it was difficult to express them in letters, so he mustered up the courage. I use these fireworks to express my longing for the princess. I hope the princess can know. Does this mean? Although he used a questioning tone, when he said it, Li Xiang felt that the 16 words for fireworks were probably this. It made sense. After thinking about it, he sighed. Zhu Jin said that Prince Na Minda is interested in the princess. It turns out it is true. Qingyu still didn't speak and had no expression on his face. He just watched the fireworks in the sky quietly. She was a little distracted, and the 16 characters formed by the light spots in the air reminded her of what Cheng Yun once said to her. In order to persuade her to get married, Cheng Jun once said that the 4th prince of Wunuosu, Minda, was talented, clear, and cheerful. He fell in love with her at first sight when he was summering in Xushui Garden. He asked to marry her out of sincerity and had no other distractions. This paragraph marriage is a great relationship. At that time, because she was disappointed with Lian Song, she was completely discouraged, and she didn't take Cheng Yun's words into her heart. Thinking about it at this time, she realized that Cheng Yun might not have lied to her. 1. If she had never met Lian Song in this life, this relationship could indeed be regarded as a good. Perhaps her heart watching the fireworks now is the same as watching the fireworks with Lian Song by the Nocturne River. She will be very happy, and a little sad will arise in her joy. Then when she sees Minda, she will tell Minda that she loves fireworks because of her mother. If Minda really loves her, then he should be willing to listen to her say these things. Then her life would be completely different. But there are never ifs and ifs in this world. The fireworks in front of him were so beautiful, and the 4th prince's feelings represented by the fireworks were also warm and sincere, but Changyu's heart was like dry sea, unable to make waves again. Maybe in the future, this sea of mine that has become calm due to dryness will be filled with water again, but it is not now. Li Xiang saw Changyu looking up at the sky, the last firework extinguished in her eyes. After thinking for a while, she spoke again hesitantly. Princess, Prince Minda likes you. Are you unhappy? Changyu was quiet for a long time and shook her head. No, she said. After a while, she added, I was just thinking, it turns out there are fireworks in Wunuosu. When the sky became quiet, she added, it's very beautiful. Li Xiang felt like he understood Qingyu's words, but also seemed like he didn't. Qingyu fell asleep very late that night. After falling asleep, she had a dream. She dreamed of the scene where she said goodbye to Lian Song in the little Jiaoqing realm. At the end of their separation, Lian Song once touched her eyebrows. Of course, she remembered that she didn't actually cry at that time, but in the dream, she cried. His slender fingers were placed at the corners of her eyes, stained with her tears. The warmth of the tears made him frown beautifully, causing pity to appear in his amber pupils, making him touch her hand gently, trembling slightly. So he failed to step back and distance himself and say, I'm leaving to her. Instead, he sighed softly and held her crying in his arms. She didn't know why she cried, nor why she obeyed his embrace. After waking up, the only thing she remembered was that she took the initiative to bury her tear-stained face deeply into his chest, and when he was slightly sweet, when she was surrounded by the cool fragrance of Baiqinan, her empty heart finally settled down. They hugged each other intimately, like two trees intertwined and coexisting, and they did not separate until the end of the dream. Qingyu sat on the bedside, thinking about the foreshadowing of the dream, and finally had to admit that the dream was the expression of the truest desire in her heart, and it helped her face herself. She likes Lian's song. He was her first love. He gave her a lot of good things, but it also caused her pain. So much so that the love was like a thorn, piercing her heart and coexisting with flesh and blood. If she was unwilling to remove it, no one can remove it. She really doesn't want to have it removed, so it's very likely that she will never like anyone else in her life. At that time in Mingxi, it was he who told her, there are always all kinds of regrets in a person's life. You will encounter many regrets because of you in this life. Only by accepting these regrets can you truly grow up. She thought he was yes, he is also a regret for her, and she must accept this regret, because this is how mortals grow up. It was still early before dawn, so she raised her hand to wipe away the tears on her face, sat in the tent for a while, then lit the lamp and took out the wedding dress from the suitcase. Under the dim nightlight, she put on the newlywed's dress layer by layer, then sat quietly on the wool blanket in the tent, leaned sideways on the table, and closed her eyes slightly. It seems that after putting on this wedding dress, she can really let go of everything in the past, and she is also ready to bravely face another experience in her life, and another beginning with no idea of the outcome. When the Tai-Bai star rose, Li Xiang walked into Qingyu's brocade tent, intending to dress the princess. Unexpectedly, beside the bright lamp, Qingyu had already made up seriously and was sitting quietly next to the berth. Li Xiang was surprised. Why did the princess get up so early? Qingyu smiled faintly, took a refreshing hot tea from the tray she brought in and took a sip. It is a last resort to let Prince Minda lead the ceremony officials to wait in the Kaisha River for a night. Let them wait any longer. It's not polite enough. Mr. Chen must want to arrive at Kaisha River at dawn to meet the wedding team, so I got up earlier so as not to miss the rush. Chang Yu's face was calm and his words were reasonable. Li Xiang was stunned. If the young princess was serious, she would indeed be a transparent and thoughtful person. She recalled that at the beginning of last year, when the Empress Dowager recalled Cheng Yu from Lichuan in the name of a marriage, the little princess was quietly embroidering her wedding dress in the carriage back to Beijing. At that time, the little girl did not understand love and was careless in embroidering her wedding dress. Now she understands love and has a heart. The strict makeup she made for herself was tinged with melancholy, but her calmness at this time was no different from her calmness then. Due to her life experience, the little princess has always been a happy-go-lucky and resigned person. She always knew. But at this moment, Li Xiang suddenly tasted a hint of bitterness from Cheng Yu's seemingly detached Jianjian, and her heart suddenly ached. When Li Xiang accompanied Cheng Yu out of the tent, there were stars in the east sky and a moon in the middle sky. It was rare for the stars and the moon to shine together. The camel team changed into red clothes, with hundreds of camels draped on large red gold silk felt pads on their backs, carrying boxes filled with Buddha statues, treasures, and books. They followed the princess's honor guard as they marched docilely toward the colored stone river. Under the clear moon, the sky and the earth are covered with white snow, vast and cold. The poplar trees in the Gobi that have lived for 3,000 years and died for 3,000 years are also covered with silver. It seems that only the color of snow is what this lonely Gobi desert should have in the depth of winter. The color makes the bride-to-be sent-off ceremonial procession decorated in pure red seem abrupt when walking in it. Shi Langchen, who was guarding the white camel riding by the princess with General Li, frowned and thought. Mr. Chen Shirlang entered the officialdom as a prostitute, and he was also a romantic and talented man who was sad about spring and autumn. It is natural to have this idea. Jifeng walked for half an hour with Cheng Shui. Not only did he feel that the dazzling guard of honor he had personally managed was incompatible with the poor desert, he also felt that the princess, who was a flower of wealth in the world, was incompatible with this poor place. Everything just doesn't match up. So what if they don't match up? The most beautiful lady in the Dashi clan still has to be given to Wu Nuosu at a cheap price. Mr. Qin Shirlang couldn't help but think about it more and more, and he felt a little annoyed after realizing it. However, This depression did not last long, because Master Qin discovered an evil problem while walking. They set off from Inzhong, and according to his plan, the camel team arrived at the Kaisha River at dawn. But they had walked for nearly an hour and were about to reach the Kaisha River. The full moon like an ice will still hung in the sky, and the thick black sky above did not light up at all. It seemed that time had stopped since the moment they set off. Stopping the passage of time, dawn will never come. But Chen Shirlang is not sure whether he has seen too many evil things along the way and is overthinking it. Maybe this is just a natural celestial phenomenon on the plateau? However, I felt a chill in my back after all. Chen Shirlang and other mortals were confused, but Zhu Jin and the others were demons who understood. It could be seen from the position of the moon that someone had indeed fixed the celestial phenomena. Zhao, she glanced at the moon in the sky coldly, then looked at Zhu Hibiscus, who was wearing a silver mask next to her. There was a hint of sarcasm in her cold voice. Although Lian San and I have stopped, it looks like we want to destroy this. The two of us are not the only ones arranging the marriage. You're staring at me and guarding against him, but it seems to have no effect. Zhu Jin didn't answer, just stared at Cheng Yu, who was not far away. Amidst the sound of ritual music with the flavor of Hu, the girl, wearing a bright red dress and a red-bottomed gold-threaded phoenix cape, has stepped onto the wide stone bridge on the Kaisha River that was specially built to welcome the bride. Walking slowly on the snow-covered bridge is like a soft and easily broken red plum. Zhu Jin raised his eyes to look at the strange celestial phenomena above his head, then frowned and strode to Cheng Yu's side. Under such circumstances, he certainly could not trust the princess's safety to the 16 guards beside her, even though he had placed the cross-dressing Ziyut and Yao Huang among them. The fourth Prince Minda stood in the center of the stone bridge, followed by the ceremony officer and several attendants. Unlike most Wunua men who were rugged and strong, this prince was tall and tall. Although he also had the appearance of a foreigner with a high nose and deep eyes, his facial features were exquisite, and he was even more handsome when there was a slight smile between his eyebrows. Minda took 2 steps forward and stared deeply at Cheng Yu with a pair of blue eyes. "Princess, princess." Cheng Yu nodded and gave a gift. Minda took another step forward and stretched out her right hand at the same time. Her fingers paused nervously in midair and finally landed on Cheng Yu's wrist with determination, holding her palm. Cheng Yu was stunned and seemed to want to break away instinctively, but for some reason he stopped that plan midway, and Minda held her hand. But she didn't look at Minda anymore. She lowered her head slightly, not knowing where her eyes were staying. Minda held her hand and looked at the top of her crow-feathered hair. "A few days ago, I heard that the princess encountered a flood on the way." The little king was very anxious. The fourth prince spoke Chinese very fluently and his voice was very gentle. After a moment of silence, Cheng Yu whispered back, "Thank you for your concern, Prince." Minda smiled slightly. "Princess, you don't have to be so polite. The palace has prepared a wedding banquet. After the wedding banquet tomorrow night, Princess will be Xiao Wang's wife. You should be used to Xiao Wang's care for you." After saying these words, like out of consideration for Cheng Yu's shyness, he changed the subject without waiting for her answer, nodding to Chen Shirlang and generally on the side, "You two sirs have traveled thousands of miles to escort the princess here. It's been a hard journey." Chen Shirlang and General Li came forward to meet Minda, and the 3 of them exchanged greetings according to the etiquette. Looking for this opportunity, Cheng Yu pulled his hand out of Minda's palm. At this moment, everyone suddenly heard a loud shout from nearby, "Be careful." Li Xiang, who had been following Cheng Yu, looked up in shock. She immediately realized that it was Zhu Hibiscus's reminder and instinctively rushed towards Cheng Yu. At the same time, a strong wind suddenly rose above the river. Li Xiang hugged Cheng Yu tightly in her arms, feeling awe-inspiring in her heart, thinking that Zhu Hibiscus had told them last night not to take it lightly until the last moment, and indeed they should not take it lightly. Li Xiang was closest to Cheng Yu, and although he could protect her immediately, his magic power was low after all. Fortunately, Zhu Jin responded calmly and immediately created a protective barrier to protect them both. Jew hibiscus was beside them, and there was a protective barrier of golden light floating around them, which made Li Xiang feel slightly at ease. However, although the barrier could resist external damage, it could not stop natural phenomena such as wind, frost, snow, and rain. The fierce wind forced people to close their eyes. Li Xiang used a free hand to block it. Suddenly he felt that his arms were empty. He hurriedly lowered his head and saw that Tangqi was nowhere to be seen. He couldn't help but be horrified. Princess, princess, he's gone. What's going on? Zhu Jin raised his head, glaring angrily at a dazzling silver light in the sky, clenching his right hand into a fist, looking extremely angry but silent. The strong wind gradually stopped, and the round light group also restrained the dazzling halo around the body, like the second moon, hanging in the sky. As the light wheel gradually moved downward, Li Xiang saw that there seemed to be a human figure hidden in it. When the light wheel finally settled in midair, Li Xiang finally saw clearly that there was an unfolded folding fan floating in the center of the light wheel. The unknown beauty lying sideways on the fan was the one who was protected by him just a moment ago. The princess in her arms. Li Xiang, a woman with beautiful makeup who was kneeling on the edge of the fan to take care of Chengyu, also recognized her as a maid of Liansong dynasty. She had come to Shihua Tower to give Chengyu paintings, and Li Xiang, a young man wearing a gray satin Taoist robe standing next to the folding fan, was even more recognized. I am very familiar with him. He is a national master who has always been on good terms with Lian and Song dynasty. Li Xiang's heart skipped a beat. Zhu Jin spoke. Because he was wearing a mask, Li Xiang could not see his expression, but from the coldness of his voice, it was not difficult to infer how angry he was at this time. You are immortal, he said, facing the Imperial Master standing quietly in midair. You can actually enter my protective barrier and take away the princess under my nose, he sneered. You are very good. The Imperial Master lowered his eyes and glanced at the people on the bank of the river who were stunned by the sudden change. Finally it fell on Zhu Jin and smiled slightly. This benefactor seems to look down on ordinary people, so he must have some background. That's right. I haven't yet attained the immortal bone, so I can't enter your barrier, but it can't stop me from being so popular. Any barrier I borrow here is like a silent flute heading to an uninhabited land. As he spoke, he held up his right hand. Sure enough, a snow-white jade flute emerged, and Jew Hibiscus's eyes narrowed slightly. The Imperial Master gently turned the jade flute in his hand, no longer paying attention to Jew Hibiscus, and looked with interest at Prince Minda, who had recovered from the shock. Perhaps out of concern for human hearing, the halo moved downwards a little again. Are you Prince Minda? The Imperial Master greeted Minda. Just now I seem to have heard the prince talking to the princess about tomorrow night. The prince looked like he was looking forward to tomorrow night. He shook his head with regret. He shook his head and said, I didn't mean to throw cold water on you, but after a quick calculation, I feel that the tomorrow night you are looking forward to, Prince, will never come. Wu Nua, a layman who believes in gods, first saw the Imperial Master in the light wheel. He originally thought that the gods appeared and came to bless Shiwu for their marriage. He was shocked and honored at the same time. After hearing these words, he realized that he had met a monster. Come and get married. But this time the great wizard did not come with him, and they did not understand the magic. They didn't know how to deal with it, and everyone couldn't help but look at each other. Prince Minda has always been calm, and he is a person who will never attack rashly without knowing where the opponent is coming from. Although the Imperial Master's aggressive words aroused hatred, Minda still held back his anger and asked quietly, I don't know. What do you mean when you say it will never come? The Imperial Master was ordered by Lian San to come here to stall for time. He estimated that His Highness the Third Highness should have arrived, so he didn't pay much attention to these people below. He replied to Minda in a nonchalant manner, that's literally. He hadn't said a word yet. After saying that, I suddenly felt the wind behind me. The Imperial Master was startled and instinctively hid to the right. While dodging, he raised his hand to push the folding fan. The Xian fan seemed to have a spirit, leading Tianbu and Chengyu to retreat quickly. In the rapid retreat comparable to that of a lowing arrow, the fan suddenly a cold mysterious light erupted, covering the two people on Shanshang. While the imperial master was dealing with Zhao Shi and Zhu Jin who were attacking from behind him, he was distractedly paying attention to the movement of the mysterious fan. Seeing the mysterious light on the fan, he breathed a sigh of relief. When the imperial master was fighting head-on with Emperor Zhaoxi and the masked man wearing a silver mask, Tianbu noticed that the masked man standing in the center of the bridge suddenly turned into light and disappeared. And then he understood that the other party should be in Su and Tongminda. During the greetings, he took advantage of the situation and used a blind trick. This deception was so sophisticated that it actually deceived them both. It seemed that it was true as Su Ji said. The other party was quite powerful. I wonder if he could resist it. However, before Tianbu could think more about the imperial master, she was soon attacked. The three demons Yao Huang, Ziyu Ten, and Li Xiang quickly caught up with them and stood a few steps away, each occupying one side and attacking the Xuanguang barrier that closely protected her and Chengyu. Although Tianbu, who followed the three lower realms, was unable to reach him, he was currently perched on the Xian fan, so he was not too worried. There is a demon-locking tower in the 9 heavens, and there is also a Zhani abyss on the bottom of the sea. The demon-locking tower locks the evil demons of the 8 desolations, and those evil monsters born in the seabed of the 4 seas are all suppressed at the bottom of the Zhani abyss. The mysterious fan that the Third Highness often plays with has the same name as the abyss, and is also called Zhani. When the Third Highness reached the age of 20,000, he personally went to the Zhani abyss and fetched the cold iron from the bottom of the abyss to make it. When the fan was completed, Emperor Donghua he also blessed him with a part of the suppressing era Yuanling. It can be said that among the most powerful body-protecting instruments in Bohuang, this fan is second only to Emperor Donghua's Tiangang shield and God Mo Yuan's Duosheng seal. It is an extremely powerful existence. The Third Highness was born to rule the 4 seas. At that time, Emperor Donghua was afraid that the young water god would not be able to suppress the evil demons in the 4 seas, so he went into seclusion for 60 years to strengthen the control of the abyss. If the evil demons wanted to use magic to break into the abyss, they would cast a few. If you divide your magic power, you will suffer some backlash. Zhani fan comes from the same origin as Zhani, so it naturally has this characteristic. Tianbu saw that under the vigorous siege of Yao Huang and his party, a burst of dazzling red light suddenly erupted around the barrier. After the red light passed, the 3 flower demons fell from the sky covered in blood, and he couldn't help but feel a little pity. Under the protection of the Xuanguang barrier, Tianbu was unscathed, but the national master was not so lucky. Although the imperial master ranks first among the Taoist priests in the country, he is facing Zhu Jin and Zhao Shi at this time. These two are the envoys of the prehistoric gods. Although Zhu Jin and Zhao Shi's magic power is limited because Zhu Ti has not returned to his throne, they are more than enough to deal with the imperial master. Not to mention that Prince Minda, who was sizing up the situation, saw that the imperial master was failing, so he also ordered the guards to set up an arrow formation, and the arrows were raining down on the millet. The imperial master was attacked from both sides, and he regretted that he had not jumped onto the Xian fan and hid in the strong protective barrier. Although the fan was not big and the barrier was quite small, he curled himself up and squeezed on top, and it was probably a squeeze. You can afford it, right? When the imperial master was distracted, the situation became even less optimistic. Seeing Zhao Shi's sword attack coming from behind, he dodged and avoided Zhao Shi's sword edge. However, with a flash of silver light, he was knocked over by Zhu Jin's sword energy. On the ground, the imperial master was about to get up, but Zhu Jin stepped forward and suppressed him hard, with the sharp sword blade at the side of his fragile neck. This was the fastest defeat the imperial master had ever had in a fight with someone. In fact, he had no self-esteem, but then he thought about the advantages of losing quickly. At least he didn't suffer many physical injuries, so that's okay. The young man's silver-masked face was only a few inches away from him, which made the Imperial Master feel pressured, and he couldn't help but raise his neck and retreat. The young man sneered, "I don't know why the general went against his promise and came to kidnap the bride, and I don't care. Untie the barrier and return the princess to me. Otherwise," the sword edge threatened to move forward half an inch, and the National Master's blood stain immediately appeared on his neck, and the young man said sternly, "The general can only go to the underworld to find you." The Imperial Master hissed, "Donor, don't be impulsive." He raised his hand and pushed the sword out tentatively, and said with a smile, "Put the sword away, and I will return the princess to you." Perhaps because he didn't expect him to be so easy to talk to, Zhu Jin was stunned, but still stared at the Imperial Master with bright eyes. The Imperial Master raised his hand and made a gesture to Tianbu in midair. Tianbu understood, lowered his head, and touched the edge of the fan. With a movement of his fingers, the mysterious light around the fan suddenly disappeared. At the same moment, the black fan suddenly flipped over, and Cheng Yu slipped from the tail of the fan. Zhao Shi, who was waiting aside, hurried forward and took the fallen girl into her arms. Seeing that Cheng Yu was safely in his own camp, Zhu Jinfeng sheathed his sword, but while sheathing the sword with his right hand, he flipped his left hand and formed a pair of silver locks to lock the National Master tightly. When he stood up with the bound Imperial Master, he heard the Imperial Master sigh faintly. "Do you really think this is useful?" Zhu Jin was silent. The Imperial Master shrugged. "If I'm not wrong, you think that by tying me up as a hostage, you can threaten His Highness the Third Prince and let the princess marry smoothly, right?" He shook his head as if it was a pity. "Although he does have some weight in His Highness's heart, you may not know him very well. He doesn't like people threatening him the most, and no one has ever successfully coerced him. It makes no sense at all for you to do so," Zhu Jin said in a deep voice. "What do you mean?" Under the white light of the bright moon, the Imperial Master looked at the layers of dark clouds that suddenly appeared on the horizon, and a smile appeared in his eyes. He is here. The motionless moon while hanging in the sky has become particularly bright at some point. Under the particularly bright moonlight, even mortals can see extremely faraway places, so almost everyone has discovered the raging wave of natural light. Among the thick clouds coming from the other side of the sky, I saw a giant silver dragon with brilliance that used its sharp claws to tear open the edge of the cloud layer and reveal its true form. There was a muffled sound of thunder, as if an infinitely powerful god was holding a double hammer and vowing to break the ceiling. In the endless thunder, the black clouds became more and more turbulent, rolling and rushing like those greedy and bad-tempered eddies in the deep sea, eager and explicit to swallow everything. However, the giant dragon wandered among them, but it was not disturbed at all. Its posture was elegant and vigorous, and its silver scales were looming in the clouds. The light of the dragon's scales is extremely beautiful, cold, and wandering. Even the moonlight cannot match it. On the ground, Dashi's wedding team and Wu Nuosu's wedding team were all shocked. Chen Shirlang was the first to come to his senses and exclaimed, "God! Shilong, it is the arrival of the Shilong." The exclamations made the crowd wake up, and they fell to the ground and knelt down in shock. The silver dragon soon came to the sky above the Kaisha River. Its huge body blocked the moon wheel, and the silver light around it eclipsed the moonlight and stars. The giant dragon lowered its head and looked at the people kneeling on the bank of the long river. A simple glance was so powerful that it made people shudder. But Cheng Yu was not afraid to look into the eyes of this giant dragon. When the first thunder sounded in the east sky, she woke up from Zhao Shi's arms. Seeing the silver dragon swimming quickly from the horizon, she was shocked and had a guess. That speculation was a bit absurd, but when she raised her head and looked directly at the extraordinary dragon, and when their eyes met in midair at that moment, she understood that her speculation was not wrong. She knew exactly who he was. The giant dragon was quietly entrenched in the midair, and the thick clouds behind it were rolling endlessly. As if to match this celestial phenomenon, a strong wind was rising over the long river again. Chang Yu couldn't help but take a step forward, looked at the silver dragon with some confusion, and said to himself, "Why are you still coming?" Her voice was very low and no one should have heard it, but the giant dragon in midair suddenly moved, then quickly leaned forward and came downwards. The giant dragon transformed when it was close to the ground. After the great silver light, the young man transformed from the silver dragon was dressed in white, and his body was like a jade tree, standing quietly in the north of the Yangtze River. The Zhani fan hanging not far away made a cool buzzing sound, closed the fan with a snap, and flew towards the young man as if he recognized his master. The young man stretched out his right hand, and the mysterious fan fell directly into his palm. Prince Minda had gold under his knees, and even though the dragon descended from the sky, he had not knelt down to worship him, and he had always been hesitant and scrutinizing the vision in front of him. However, when he saw the young man's face clearly, Minda couldn't help but change his expression. "Shi Chao's, General, how is it possible?" Minda recognized Lian Song, but no mortal in the Shi dynasty recognized their general, because everyone was relatively pious and was kneeling on the ground seriously and had no time to desert. The imperial master's eyes circled around Lian Song and then returned to the midair where the silver dragon was entrenched just now, as if he was still recalling the heroic appearance of His Highness the Third Prince. The person standing next to him was no longer Ju Hibiscus, but Tianbu. When he followed his gaze and discovered the body of Lian San's silver dragon, Zhu Jin immediately turned into light and ran away. Although this move surprised the imperial master, he was not very concerned about it. At this time, the imperial master was staring at the sky where thick clouds were still billowing and sighed with Tianbu. "This is the first time I have seen the true form of His Highness the Third Highness. He is indeed the only silver dragon in the world. He is indeed so majestic." Tianbu also stared at the thick clouds in the sky. Does the imperial master know that gods have their true form and also their transformed form? As a cultivator, the national master knew this knowledge point and answered Tianbu with a smile. "The original form is the firstborn form of a god, and the transformed form is the form that a god can obtain during his growth and practice, right?" Tianbu nodded. "Theoretically, the gods have 32 transformations, but in fact not every god can cultivate 32 transformations. However, His Highness the Third Prince is extremely talented in this way. Under the guidance of Emperor Donghua, he learned all the transformations as soon as he reached adulthood." The national master was puzzled by Tianbu's intention of suddenly discussing this knowledge point with him. "What do you mean?" Tianbu frowned slightly, seeming to be worried. "Your Highness's favorite appearance is the human appearance. Sometimes he makes fun of people by using the appearance of a lion, a unicorn, or a red bird. I have served His Highness for many years, and I have rarely seen him appear as a dragon. True form. According to past experience, if His Highness appears as a divine dragon, something big is going to happen." The imperial preceptor didn't take it seriously. "Let's just grab a bride this time. What big thing can happen?" But at this point, the imperial preceptor suddenly remembered the behavior of His Highness the Third Highness. He was silent for a while and asked tentatively, "Boo, what big things happened when the Third Highness showed his true colors in the past?" Tianbu said heavily, "The last time Your Highness showed his true colors was when the demon-locking tower in the 9 heavens collapsed and all the demons were roaming around in chaos for the 27th day. At that time, all the important immortals in the sky were in seclusion, and the other immortals took away all the demons that were roaming around. The demon had no choice but to use the earthly evil shield to trap it, but it was hard to say how long the earthly evil shield could last, so His Highness transformed into the true form of a divine dragon to subdue all the demons, purify the demonic energy, and restore clarity to the 27th day. She paused and said, "Your Highness, he has the appearance of a dragon. Generally speaking, he will deal with such big things." The imperial preceptor gasped. "According to what you said, what Your Highness is going to do this time should not be as simple as just taking the princess away." The imperial preceptor suddenly became extremely worried. "You said, His Highness, What he wants to do this time is not as simple as just taking the princess away. What kind of trouble are you going to get us into? Tianfu didn't answer, but looked solemnly at the isolated back of the young man not far away. The strong wind swept up the snow, and the wind and snow were so strong that they covered the sky and the moon. The young man stepped up and walked towards the girl in red across the river. As if he didn't realize that the long river was an obstacle, he stepped straight into the rapid stream with an elegant posture. When the young man's brocade boots touched the river suddenly swelled and became level with the ground. The raging water suddenly tamed down, forming a huge and smooth ice surface to absorb his steps. As the young man walked on the ice, the surrounding wind gradually subsided, leaving only the pure white snow powder floating in the air, dotted in the moonlight. The snow and moon reflected each other, weaving into a hazy shark's gauze covering this corner of the Gobi. Make everything in it appear ethereal, beautiful, and unreal. Looking at the long river that suddenly became quiet and became incomparably beautiful, and the young man walking slowly towards her in the river, Chang Yu seemed to be bewitched, and unconsciously took a step forward, and then she was immediately stopped by Zhao Shi. Living. Zhao Shi quickly reached out to stop her, grabbed her waist and led her back a few steps cautiously, warning in her ear, "Don't go." The young man was still far away from them, but he should have seen Zhao Shi's movements. He stopped, looked at the two people relying on each other for a moment, and said calmly, "Ayu, come here." The young man's voice was not loud, but it was clearly heard by everyone on the south bank. When the familiar voice reached her ears, Qingyu's heart shook violently. She raised her hand to press her chest, and after a moment of silence, she lowered her head, as if to avoid the young man's gaze, and did not intend to go as the young man said. Come to him. It's very clear what she chose. The world was peaceful. Zhao Shi looked at the young man standing quietly in the middle of the river and curled his lips mockingly. But when Zhao Shi laughed sarcastically, a ray of red light suddenly appeared from the edge of Qingyu's shoes, like a spiritual snake, silently climbing up to her waist. That ray of light was the same color as Qingyu's cloak, and almost no one noticed it. The red light turned into a palm-width red ribbon, and with a sudden tug, the girl let out a soft cry. She was suddenly pulled by the ribbon onto the ice of the river. Zhao Shi's reaction was not slow, and she immediately took action to fight when something unexpected happened. But everything happened too fast. When Qingyu was captured by the ribbon and separated from him, an ice wall immediately stood up to block him. Between the two of them, Zhao Shi raised his sword and struck. However, although the ice wall was thin, it was invulnerable, keeping Zhao Shi and everyone out. In the middle of the long river, snow and fog were thick, and everyone's sight was also blocked. Within the ice wall, red light entangled the girl, sending her to Liansong in a snap of her fingers. When the young man's handsome face came into view, the wall of defense that Chang Yu had worked so hard to build instantly collapsed. Her throat was choked, and her eyes suddenly turned red. Helplessness and sadness filled her heart, and she suppressed it with all her strength. She thought that maybe he showed up at this time because he was unwilling, but no matter what he thought, this was the path she had decided long ago, and she would not and could not change it, so she spoke first, speaking as loudly as possible. Very low and flat, as if she was not moved by his appearance. "Why are you here? Didn't I make it very clear at that time? I will not go with you." Her eyes were focused on Wu Nuosa's eyes on the north bank. The wedding team said, "Mortals are powerless and dare not fight with the dragon. If you want to take me away, they will not stop you." At this point, she took a deep breath, as if she had to do this to have the strength to make another decision. She refused him, but the marriage itself is something that cannot be changed. If it wasn't me, it would be someone else. Now that things have happened, I can't abandon my responsibility. Brother Lian San, she called him softly and returned her gaze. On his face, "Please don't push me." She thought she was calm in everything she said and did, but the water in the corners of her eyes betrayed her sadness. The young man listened quietly to the last words she said before speaking. It's not that you don't want to choose me, but that you feel you can't choose me. He paused, and the fact that you can't choose me makes you sad, right? Tangqi raised his eyes in shock and moved his lips, but did not answer. The young man approached her, and when she realized that there was almost no gap between them, Tangqi immediately wanted to retreat, but the young man's left hand holding the fan controlled her lower back. Unable to break away, she looked up at him, her eyes stunned and confused. The young man half-hugged her and looked down into her eyes. The eyes that were soaked with tears seemed to be covered with mist, and when they looked at him, their eyes were like smoke. He raised his hand, touched her face with his fingers, pressed his palm gently against her cheek, and frowned slightly. It's so cold. His long fingers stroked her cheek back and forth, gently and slowly, as if he wanted to give her a little warmth. She finally couldn't hold it any longer and raised her hand to hold his, as if to push him away, but for some reason she couldn't make the move to refuse. She could only plead with him miserably. Don't do this. The young man's movement stopped, but he did not lower his hand. He looked at her quietly, his eyes extremely focused, as if he wanted to carve her sadness and bewilderment into the deepest part of his mind. It was as if he was enjoying her being bewildered and sad for him. Just when she couldn't stand his gaze anymore, the young man finally spoke. If marriage is not as you said, it is an unchangeable thing. Ayu, are you willing to go with me? Qingyu's heart suddenly hurt. This time she finally pushed his hand away, turned her face to one side to avoid his gaze, and said with a wry smile, "How is that possible? We all know that it cannot be changed." "What if it can be changed?" he asked her persistently. "If it can be changed." She murmured again, her eyes filled with water. She closed her eyes in despair and held back the tears that were almost uncontrollable. "This is not the only problem between us. Brother Lian-san, you should understand that the person you love." The young man interrupted her. "Okay, don't say anything that will make me angry." She trembled slightly, but as he wished, she did not continue to say those words. Perhaps the worry frightened her, so as he half-hugged her, the young man leaned over slightly, pressed his forehead against hers, and whispered comfortingly, "Don't be afraid." He added, "I've thought about it seriously." Qingyu thought hopelessly that she should push him away. They should not continue to be entangled like this, let alone be so close. She also understood that if she really struggled hard, he would never restrain her. He also knew that she didn't really want to get away from him. She didn't want to push him away, so she couldn't push him away. She was extremely disappointed with herself like this, but she had no choice but to whisper to herself in her heart that this was the last time, so that she could feel the warmth of his embrace one last time. She quickly convinced herself, no longer competing with herself, and tamely allowed him to press his forehead against hers and whisper in her ear. The young man was unaware of her tortuous thoughts and spoke to her in a low voice. "At that time, you said that the person I loved was actually Tangqi, and you said that the authorities are obsessed with it, but the beholder is clear." The corners of his lips were pursed slightly, showing a sense of ridicule, but her voice was still gentle, as if she was a fragile treasure that must be treated with the softest heart and the most considerate words. "But after I went back and thought about it seriously, I still don't feel that I love her. She is the person." Chengyu looked up blankly. "You?" Because of her movements, their cheeks were almost touching and their breaths were touching. "The one I love is you." When he said this, the young man closed his eyes and breathed deeply. She froze for a moment and didn't answer. "I know you don't want to believe it." He still closed his eyes as if he had anticipated her reaction, so he was not disappointed. His free hand wrapped around her shoulder, and he held her in his arms, his lips moving from her forehead to her ears. She didn't know what she could do. She just instinctively followed his movements and tilted her neck slightly, letting him do what he did almost sacrificially, thinking numbly in her heart, "This is the last time. This is the last time." Then she heard him whisper in her ear, "It doesn't matter if you don't believe it. I'll prove it to you." His thin lips pressed a kiss to her ear. "You said I once risked everything for Tangqi." He chuckled nonchalantly. That's nothing to be desperate for. The only person in this world who can make me desperate is you. An ominous premonition suddenly enveloped Chengyu. She opened her eyes suddenly and wanted to ask him what he meant by saying this. But before the words could be spoken, a strong force suddenly came from her chest. A red light flashed, and when her eyes were able to see, she found that she was far away from the young man and was in Bayan Tianbu's arms. Chengyu's heart was beating fast, and he immediately wanted to break away from Tianbu and go to the middle of the river, but he saw a fierce wind rising in the vast mist. The suppressing fan rode the wind up, and when it reached the midair, it suddenly opened, and the mysterious light diffused from the fan. Come out, forming a huge double-deer golden wheel at the top of the sky. The golden wheel drove away the evil, and the dark golden light shrouded it, forming a barrier, illuminating and protecting the entire Gobi, except for the Kaisha River where Lin and Song dynasties were located. Although it was clearly blocked by the fog, it was impossible to distinguish the young man's figure, let alone what he was going to do, but the ominous feeling in Chengyu's heart became more and more intense, and she always felt that something she really didn't want to see was about to happen. She pushed away Tianbu, who was blocking her, and stumbled forward. When she approached the river embankment, she was blocked by a black gold light curtain standing on the riverside. The Imperial Master and Tianbu followed, holding Chengyu's arm that was beating the light curtain desperately, and tried to drag her back, but the girl struggled fiercely. The Imperial Master had no choice but to look at the back of Chengyu's hand, which was already blue. To prevent her from hurting him further, he formed a 10-foot-long silk ribbon and tied her up. The girl couldn't resist, as if she had a premonition of something. She looked at the two of them with tearful eyes and let out a hopeless cry. Stop him, no matter what he wants to do. Please help me stop him. The Imperial Master and Tianbu looked at each other. The Imperial Master frowned and said nothing. Tianbu slowly shook his head. We don't know what His Highness is going to do, but this light curtain is a derivative of Zhenyi Yuan, and no one can penetrate it, so no one can stop His Highness. Amidst Tianbu's solemn words, the furious wind blew the snow and mist into pieces, and their vision became clear. They were finally able to see clearly the figure of the young man in the middle of the river. The water god in white clothes stands proudly between heaven and earth, with his hands carrying the golden wheel seal. Silver light emerges from the seal and reaches the zenith. The two golden deer wheels on the zenith vibrate, increasing several times in size as they rotate, like the sun. The wheel hangs in the sky. The young man decoded the seal and suddenly rolled up his sleeves. The golden wheel buzzed, and the light of black gold instantly filled the world. Wherever the light reaches is the place protected by the barrier. The mysterious light extends to the sky, seemingly protecting the entire human world except Keishi. It is vast and incomparable. The young man glanced at the scene in front of him, stretched out his right hand, and a silver spear appeared in the palm of his hand. It was the halberd spear forged from the cold iron of the North Sea. The divine weapon appeared in the world, and there was a strong wind and thunder. The young man raised his spear, made a seal with one hand, and poured all the power stored in the seal into the gun body. The silver gun drank enough of its immortal power and let out a roar that shook the sky. The young man took control of the spear and stabbed it fiercely. The long river burst, huge waves rose, lightning pierced the sky, thunder resounded across the sky, and the earth trembled. Everyone on the river bank only saw the young man piercing the river with a spear. The next moment, the angry current was rolling in, hitting the Xuanguang barrier on the bank, setting off a wave of more than 10 feet high, like a wave trying to break out of a prison. The beast deterred them, intimidated them, and completely blocked their view of the center of the river. However, although the huge waves can block the sight of mortals, they cannot block the flower demons on the south bank and the national master on the north bank. The flower demons jumped up and hung in the air, looking solemnly behind the huge waves. The Imperial Master was always curious and unwilling to lag behind. He raised his hand and turned into a cloud and brought Tianbu and Chengyu to the sky. Looking down from a high altitude, The Imperial Master was shocked. Under the impact of the halberd and the gun, the bottom of the Kaisha River was deeply cracked along the east-west direction, and the crack was as large as 100 feet. The water flow was quite tame. It gushes out from the gaping mouth and merges with the water waves that retreat to the bank. This makes a long Gobi River that was originally only a few hundred feet wide. In less than half a stick of incense, it is as vast as a river. But the young man in the middle seemed to be dissatisfied with everything in front of him. He stood solemnly on the water waves, formed a seal with his left hand again, and blessed the body of the silver gun with immortal power. Then he slapped it hard with his right hand, and the whole body was glowing with dazzling silver light. The spear penetrated deeper into the ground. An even more dazzling silver light burst out from the tip of the gun, rushing between the huge cracks. In just 5 snaps, a loud noise suddenly came from the ground, and the cracks at the bottom of the river stretched to an unimaginable end at that moment. The entire Gobi Desert, which was originally tightly connected, was divided into 2 halves with the fissure as the boundary, one moving north and the other moving south. The water in the center of the earth has been trapped for many years. Once it is freed, it bursts out like a wild horse. The wind blows, the clouds move, the earth cracks, and the sea grows. The sudden sound of thunder was like the collapse of the 9 heavens. Tianbu looked at all this in confusion and suddenly realized, so that's it. It turns out that Your Highness wants to split the earth and create a sea. The Imperial Master also understood. At the same time, he was stunned. He looked at Tianbu and couldn't speak clearly. Yes, indeed, between Wu, Wunuosu, Beiwei, Da, and Dashi. Tianbu interrupted him. Slow down. You stutter like this, it makes me uncomfortable. The Imperial Master calmed down for a moment and finally stopped stammering. I mean to create a sea between these 3 countries to separate them, completely changing their geographical relationship, and indeed changing their political relationship. Naturally, she no longer needs to marry Wunuosu, and the princess will be free. The Imperial Master couldn't help but admire the Third Highness's operation, both from the conceptual level and the technical level. The Third Highness is indeed a god who dares to think and do, which is admirable. But he still couldn't bear it. Zhu asked a question in his soul, but this is the sea from the flat earth. Donor, this is the sea from the flat earth. As gods, can you do whatever you want? Tianbu sighed, thinking of course not, and her eyes fell on Qingyu again, who was a few steps away. A moment ago, the girl who was struggling to beg them to stop the fierce emotions was now just kneeling quietly on the edge of the clouds, staring at the young man who calmly controlled the huge waves in the 4 directions amidst the surging wind and thunder. Tianbu had been paying attention to Qingyu, and she found that Zikenjia was tied up by the Imperial Master. When Yunqiu saw His Highness the Third Prince, there was no ups and downs on his face. She seemed to have quickly accepted the reality that no one could stop this. Her eyebrows were red, filled with sadness and melancholy, but she did not show any more emotions. But at certain extremely frightening moments, she would close her eyes in fear and press her cheek against the light curtain in front of her, as if doing so would make her feel at ease. The Imperial Master didn't get Tianbu's answer, so he turned to look at her and saw that she was looking at Chengyu. He also looked around and saw that the princess was quiet and obedient at this time. After thinking about it, he raised his hand and removed Chengyu's clothes. Bound, Guangling returned to his hands. Qingyu didn't react when the restraints were released. It didn't matter whether he tied her up or let her go. The Imperial Master has a big heart and is a straight man, so he doesn't see anything wrong with Changyu being like this. Tianbu was a little worried when he saw this, but he had no choice but to sigh deeply in his heart. The Imperial Master leaned over, insisting that Tong Tianbu continue the topic just now, and asked her again, "Do you really think there is no problem with the Third Highness acting like this?" Tianbu smiled bitterly. How could there be no problem? Everything in the world has destiny, and the destiny of the country in this world also belongs to destiny. The splitting of the earth and the creation of the sea have wide implications. It will not only change the national destiny of the 3 kingdoms. This is a very serious act against heaven. If you do this, the Heavenly Lord will definitely punish you severely. The Imperial Master's heart skipped a beat. For example, what kind of punishment? After asking this question, the Imperial Master couldn't help but look at Qingyu, because at this moment he suddenly remembered Qingyu's crazy appearance when he begged them to stop Lian San, and he suddenly had a speculation in his heart. Could it be that the little princess understood His Highness's intention at that time? Why, and having guessed the consequences of his actions, are you so excited? He remembered the despair and fear in Qingyu's eyes at that time. Although he was a little surprised, he half believed it. Yunqi was not broad, and they were not far apart. He thought that the little princess must have heard all the conversations between him and Tianbu. He seemed to tremble when he saw her, but he wasn't sure. Tianbu didn't know how to answer the question the Imperial Master had just asked. After a moment of silence, he murmured, "I don't know what kind of punishment, after all. No immortal has ever committed such a serious crime in the past." As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of roaring tigers and dragons suddenly sounded in the sky from all directions. The Imperial Master was weighing himself down, but when he heard the sound and saw a piece of purple light passing by on the horizon, he lost his composure for a moment and asked Tianbu in shock, "What is that?" Tianbu was also shocked. It is recorded in the Immortal Code that every place in the mortal world has its own laws. This was decided upon by the gods after the establishment of the new god era. How the mountains, rivers, seas, and rivers in the mortal world are distributed is also part of the laws of the mortal world. The laws are guarded by 4 auspicious beasts, so if I guess correctly, Tianbu looked at the horizon. It should be the 4 auspicious beasts that protect the laws of the mortal world. As if to confirm Tianbu's words, with a bird chirping throughout the sky, the next moment, purple lights representing auspiciousness coming from all directions gathered at the zenith. The dazzling halo receded, and a blue dragon and a white tiger suddenly appeared in the purple light. The huge true forms of the 4 auspicious beasts of Suzaku and Xuanwu. In the middle of the sea, the white-clothed water god has not yet completely tamed the unruly gushing water under his feet. However, when the 4 auspicious beasts gathered together, he immediately made a decision and suddenly pulled out the water and plunged it in. The spear in the ground is half-stretched, so that the spear body lies across the sea. With a slight push, the immortal power is injected into the spear body. The halberd is left to cross the spear to temporarily suppress the wild and untamable waves in this new ocean. Then he spun around and flew into the air. With a flash of silver light, he transformed into a dragon again. Amid lightning and thunder, dragons roared and tigers roared, redbirds chirped, turtles and snakes hissed, and silver dragons shuttled between thunder and lightning clouds, 1 against 4, fighting with the 4 beasts. Although it was 1 against 4, the silver dragon had the upper hand at the beginning, but no matter whether it was water attack, fire, or lightning strike, it could only temporarily trap the 4 beasts that were transformed by mortal luck and had no flesh and blood bodies. Can't really hurt them. Perhaps he used too much mana when he split the earth and spent most of his cultivation to suppress Xinhai beneath him. Faced with the entanglement of the 4 beasts, the giant dragon gradually became helpless. At this critical moment, while the 3 beasts of Qinglong, White Tiger, Suzaku, and Silver Dragon were fighting head-on, Xuanwu, who lived in Zhenbishan, saw the opportunity and suddenly wrapped his body around the dragon's tail. The dragon was furious and swung its tail violently, but Xuanwu's soft snake body wrapped the dragon's tail tightly, and its sharp teeth took the opportunity to bite the dragon's body. The giant dragon roared angrily and no longer insisted on throwing away the annoying turtle and snake. Instead, it dragged Xuanwu and quickly dived into the thick clouds. The 3 beasts did not know where they were and followed closely. Thick clouds covered the sky and the moon, and the sky and the earth were dark. Only the roars of auspicious beasts could be heard behind the clouds. Tianbu and the Imperial Master were anxious, but unexpectedly, a strong wind suddenly rose from the top of the sky at the next moment. The violent wind blew away the dark clouds. Under the bright moon, the silver dragon and the 4 beasts reappeared, but there were a red bird and a red bird between the giant dragon's claws. Xuanwu, the huge dragon body wrapped around the struggling white tiger, and had swallowed half of the green dragon in his mouth. In less than half a moment, all 4 auspicious beasts entered the dragon's belly, and then the dragon let out a clear roar, and the whole body suddenly erupted with dazzling purple light. Immediately afterwards, the giant dragon seemed to feel pain and rolled endlessly among the clouds. Silver light suddenly flowed around its body, and then purple light shone brightly. The 2 lights of purple and silver seemed to be competing within the dragon's body. The Imperial Master was nervous and his voice trembled. Your Majesty, this is. Tianbu stared at the giant dragon churning on the ceiling for a moment. The 4 holy beasts are just a kind of protective power. Your Highness changed the laws of this world and prompted the ancestors to protect this place. The protective power of the world appears. They want to correct the changes made by His Highness. The protective power has no real body in the first place, it can only take shape. It cannot hurt or destroy it. His Highness swallowed them into his belly, which should be his plan. Assimilate this power and make them recognize their master again. If successful, these 4 beasts can be used by His Highness to guard the mortal legal system that he has changed and newly stipulated. She paused, her voice trembling a little. But your Highness has just split the earth to create the sea, and has already lost a lot of cultivation. To tame the newly formed sea has also consumed a lot of cultivation. At this time, it is too reluctant to conquer these 4 beasts. Before Tianbu could finish his words, there was a sudden dragon roar in the middle of the sky, and the dragon's body erupted with intense silver light. Although the layer of purple light covering the dragon's body was still struggling, it was finally swallowed up. The dazzling silver dragon soared in the sky, like a giant blade glowing with cold light, piercing the middle roof, cutting the flowing clouds, and rain poured down from the sky. During the thunder and lightning storm, the giant dragon suddenly opened its mouth, and the 4 auspicious beasts it had just swallowed came out of the dragon's mouth one after another, with a wandering silver light glowing all over its body. As the 4 auspicious beasts left the body, the light around the dragon dimmed, as if all the power was given to the 4 tamed auspicious beasts. And with the rebirth of the 4 auspicious beasts, this powerful dragon finally exhausted its strength. After swaying its tail for the last time, it plummeted from the sky. At the same time, without the support of the immortal power, the Zheni fan in midair suddenly closed, and the mysterious light barrier across the coast also disappeared. The moment the barrier disappeared, the Ji Yueqing guarding the newly formed sea also disappeared, turned into light and disappeared without a trace. Seeing that the seawater was about to become noisy again, after a loud birdsong, the 4 newly born auspicious beasts, led by Suzaku, rushed to the bottom of the sea one after another. The moment the auspicious beasts entered the sea, silver light spread across the entire sea surface, and the turbulent sea water calmed down again. Halfway up the sky, the dragon that fell from the sky had turned into a human form. The Imperial Master did not dare to neglect, and came up with his sword to catch the pale young man. Seeing that the 3rd Highness was still awake, the Imperial Master was relieved with his heart in his throat. When he turned around, he found Xinyu standing on the edge of the clouds floating in the air, staring at them blankly. He suddenly raised his feet and moved forward. Fortunately, he was caught by Tianbu, which prevented him from falling to pieces. The Imperial Master broke into a cold sweat and quickly distracted himself to make the clouds fall to the ground. The thunder gradually stopped, the rain stopped, and the blue sea swayed slowly under the dome, like sky. The stationary moon wheel in the sky finally returned to its original trajectory. The full moon is sinking and the sky is bright. The Imperial Master helped His Highness, who was extremely weak due to exhaustion, to sit firmly under a huge poplar tree by the coast. When he raised his eyes, he saw Chengyu coming down from the clouds not far away, looking towards him blankly, a few steps away from where they were. The little princess's steps were slow and her expression was hollow. After walking a few more steps, the expression on her face gradually recovered. Her palm-sized face was filled with fear, worry, and pain, and her eyes were filled with mist in the blink of an eye. She suddenly stumbled over with her skirt in hand and stopped a few steps in front of the two of them, as if she wanted to get closer but didn't dare. His Highness the Third Highness sat down under the tree with his knees bent, leaning against the tree trunk, looking up at the little princess who was panting slightly. Neither of them spoke, and the small desert beach was eerily quiet for a moment. Even though the Imperial Master had a big heart, he felt that he was redundant and quietly retreated, leaving this world to the two of them who looked at each other in silence. Qingyu didn't know how she came to the young man. Her heart was filled with timidity and sadness. When she realized what she was doing, she had knelt down beside the young man and unconsciously held the young man's hand with one hand. On the right wrist, the other hand touched his face. Whether it was her left hand or her right hand, the young man's skin that was touched was as cold as ice and snow, and she couldn't help trembling. At the same time, she heard her own voice trembling as she asked him so softly and with such fear, "Brother Lian-san, are you okay?" The young man didn't answer. He looked at her for a while, then suddenly tilted his head, buried his left cheek in her palm, and closed his eyes as if attached to her. "Now, should I believe that the person I love is you? It's okay if you don't believe it, I'll prove it to you." The words that the young man whispered in her ear before the ground was shattered suddenly flashed through Qingyu's mind, and when she was caught by the last trace of reason, it turned into a giant hammer of iron and stone, hitting her heart hard, causing her chest to tremble. Dull pain. She finally couldn't bear it any longer and burst into tears. She couldn't tell whether she was more angry or more desperate. "Why do you need to prove it like this?" "I don't need you to prove it to me at all." The young man was stunned, smiled, and followed her. "Okay, Ayu doesn't need it, but I want to prove it to Ayu and let Ayu understand my heart." In fact, that's not the case. Chengyu understands that Chang'e is a knot in her heart that is difficult to untie. If Lian-san hadn't come to snatch her bride with such fanfare today and risked everything for her, she might never be able to believe his affection for her in her entire life. In Qingyu's secret dreams, she indeed longed for Lian-san to risk everything for her once, but she never thought about making this dream come true. Because she didn't want to hurt him. She never wanted him to expend a lot of cultivation for her, and she never wanted him to be punished because of her. Regret and unspeakable pain seized Chengyu. Under the gentle comfort of the young man, she cried out of breath, "Why do you have to follow my words? Don't follow my words." She posted the sticker. He took the young man's hand back and put it on his lap, like a child who had done something wrong, tightly grabbing the skirt on his knee, feeling extremely regretful. "Actually, it's all my fault. I said I shouldn't have done it. What I said forced you to do such an irrational thing." The young man held her hand and rubbed her clenched fists with comforting force. When they relaxed, he took her right hand and put it to his lips, pressing a kiss on the back of her hand. "Don't mess around. I think it's not your fault, and it's not you who forced me." He paused, "But you did have something that shouldn't be said." He looked at her crimson eyes and skillfully reached out to wipe her tears. "You shouldn't say you will forget me soon." He looked at her seriously and asked her seriously, "Now, can you forget me soon?" Qingyu was stunned for a moment, and then she remembered that it was when they said goodbye in the Xiaojiaking realm. She said to him, "Even if we like each other, it is not a deep relationship. Please forget about me." When he asked her if she would soon forget him, although she didn't think so, she did not deny his words. She didn't know he would remember those words so deeply. Tears burst out again. She didn't want to do this, but she had no choice. She hurt him, and she felt ashamed of herself. She couldn't help but cover her eyes with one hand, shook her head sadly, and honestly confessed to the young man, "It is impossible for me to forget you, even if the day we say goodbye in Xiaojiajing is the last time we see each other. There is no way I can forget you." The young man's face changed slightly. She continued to murmur, "At that time, I did think about it and believed that Brother Lian-san would soon forget me, but I knew that I would never forget you. I also decided to never forget you, but I can't tell you because I think it's a bit embarrassing, and I don't want you to think that I say one thing and do another." The young man took away the palm that covered her eyes and forced her to face him. "Is that so?" he asked. Looking into the young man's smiling eyes, she felt a little confused and a little embarrassed, but she nodded obediently. "Yes. You decided to never forget me. Are you planning to never forget me for a moment or for years to come? Or—" She burst into tears. "I plan to never forget Brother Lian San for the rest of my life." The young man reached out his hand and suddenly pulled her into his arms, hugging her tightly. After a long time, he sighed softly on top of her head. "One life is not enough, it takes life after life." She actually didn't know the significance of him pestering her for a trivial decision now, but confessing her feelings to him and saying that she would remember him for the rest of her life made her sad and satisfied. He wanted to ask for more, and she was willing to agree to it, so she reached out and held his shirt, buried her entire cheek into his chest, and nodded lightly. Thinking that he might not be able to see it, he said, softly, with a nice nasal sound. The nasal sound made the young man's heart soften. He lowered his head slightly and pressed a kiss on her temples. The blue sea is microwaved and the sea breeze is gentle. The two hugged each other under the poplar tree for a long time, their red clothes and white robes entwined together. Although the world was huge, nothing could separate them. Prince Minda stood not far away and looked at the two people embracing each other under the poplar tree. The ceremony officers and attendants were all in a trance after experiencing this strange encounter. As if in a dream, Minda was the first to wake up, looking at the huge sea rising suddenly in front of him and watching the silver-white girl lying obediently under the ancient tree. In the young man's arms, Minda's shocked heart felt a twinge of pain. He really liked the little princess in red. Minda admired Chinese studies since he was a child, and his teacher was a suave Han scholar. This teacher once taught him 8 words. It is appropriate to move and be still, it is appropriate to be happy, and it is appropriate to be angry. It is said that among all the Chinese words that describe the beauty of Han women, these 8 characters are the best. Minda didn't understand it before, until that evening in Suetsu Water Garden last year. That evening, he returned to the court in front of the Mingwei Palace in search of the lost jade pendant. When passing the low wall on the east side of the Ju venue, I looked up and saw a girl in white holding a juice stick and riding a horse galloping past, creating a pattern of 5 sticks flying 5 copper coins. At that time, he didn't pay much attention to it. He just realized that there were also such masters among Han women. The teacher said that Han women were weak, but that was not the case. He continued to walk along the east wall towards the viewing platform. The horse under the girl also stopped and walked slowly along the east wall. At that time, they were only a few feet away from each other. He felt a gust of fragrant wind blowing beside him. He couldn't help but look up and saw the girl lifting her sleeves to wipe away the fragrant sweat. The woman's face was astonishingly beautiful, her red lips were slightly hooked, and she looked at her friend not far away with a half-smiling smile, not sure if she was proud or happy. Minda was stunned on the spot. The 8 words mentioned by the teacher suddenly hit his heart. His face remained calm, but his heart was like a drum. Then he quietly inquired and found out that she was the princess of Dashi. He asked a lot about her and found out that no one could match her intelligence. He knew that she loved to play and laugh. He knew that she was the best at getting into trouble. He also knew that she was not good at music and painting. Welcoming his bride today, he thought that his long-cherished wish would come true and she would become his wife, but who would have expected? He should have understood long ago that such a girl is not something that can be tolerated by just anyone. As Prince Wunuosu, he thought he could have this qualification. But how can he be compared with the gods? How can a mortal compete with gods for a bride? Minda didn't have any regrets in her heart, but she could only suppress her regrets in her heart. He is full of tenderness, but he is also full of reason. Taking one last look at the pair of figures hugging each other under the Euphratica tree, Minda turned around and led the horse. Without greeting the ceremony officer and his entourage, he walked alone towards the snowy road when he came. End of Lotus Step Chapter 29, Book 2. By Tangqi English translated using Google.